Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar.
We actually very glad to see you guys, and we know that you are waiting to this webinar, and we also
Feel free to. Oh, sorry, Olga.
Feel free to ask questions. And just want to very shortly say about myself. I'm an online professional teacher, and mostly I teach Russian as a foreign language. And that's it. It's the only my foreign language, actually.
So I've been teaching online for a couple of years, but previously working in language centers and language schools. And English is my first language and the language that I teach. So be great to hear and see where everybody else is joining us from, probably all over the world, no doubt. Looking forward to seeing your questions and answering them if we can. Otherwise, Olga, should we get started?
Yeah, I think so. I think then we will probably have more questions. Now we don't.
All right, not a problem. Let's get started. So today we're looking at, as you know, best practices in teaching conversation. So we just divided this between the two of us. I'm going to start us off, just giving you what I see as the key features for teaching conversation, and maybe some tips and things to bear in mind. And then Olga will take over from there. So the key areas, obviously teaching conversation is itself quite a wide area, but there's sort of 6 areas that I see as quite important. I've listed them here on the left, but I'm going to go through each one of them in detail now. So taking a closer look, the first one, and for me probably the most important one, is a focus on dialogue. So for whatever reason, be it because your learner has chosen a specific lesson type from you, or you've pre-agreed it with your student, you are now engaging in a conversation class with them or a conversation section of your lesson. So what this means is that you really do need to focus on dialogue. All right. I think it's important to mention that because for many students, their time with you, their 30 minutes or hour in the week, is their only exposure to a proficient speaker of the language they're learning, perhaps that whole week or that whole fortnight. And so you want them to come away from the lesson feeling that they've really gotten something from it, that it's been really valuable. And I think the best way to do that, or one of the best ways, is to ensure that they've had an opportunity to do a lot of speaking and to also listen out for ways that you speak and words that you use. So there's many ways that you can do this. I've listed them here. One of them is to create the right atmosphere. So it's not going to be a grammar lesson or a reading lesson. Really, all you need is your camera and your voice. Camera, obviously, if your student has chosen to use that. I know sometimes learners don't. But you want to just make sure that they can see you clearly, that you're listening to them, and importantly, perhaps that you're not trying to multitask. So maybe not preparing homework for later or checking any messages that might have come in. Because if you've ever worked in a school and you've seen students, with their mobile phones in their laps, it's pretty obvious when people are doing this. And again, you want the student to know that you're focused on them. So the next point is avoid breaking the flow. Remember, it's a conversation, so you want to make it as authentic as possible. So that does mean interruptions, but perhaps not interruptions for grammar and corrections all the time, because I find that can be quite demotivating. I personally take lessons as well on italki, and I really appreciate when I have an opportunity to get a story out and not have too many corrections, particularly with grammar, because then I start to think, I'm going to say the next thing wrong, and it sort of, takes all the air out of it, I suppose. And prepare the topic is another important point. Prepare the topic, but not the lesson. So if it's a new learner or perhaps a regular student that always comes back to you, you'll probably have your store of topics and materials, and that's great. But bear in mind, conversation can go a completely different direction, and that's absolutely fine, because the key here is to ensure that the learner is speaking and having an opportunity to get some listener feedback from you. Okay, moving on then to the next key area, get to know your learner. Now, this can be hard if this is a brand new student, but even in that lesson, you can get to know them. Listening out for things that they say. Often with new learners, it's a case of, why are you learning this language? What is your experience in this language already? And anything that they offer you in terms of personal experiences or any details, you can zoom in on that and sort of maybe expand on it, get them to talk more about it. That'll help you to pick up on what topics they might actually be interested in doing the next time that they speak to you. Remembering details, I think this is quite important, but it really does depend on the student and on the teacher. But it can be helpful with regular students when you remember things that they might have mentioned in the past. So they might have mentioned a holiday they were going on, or maybe a child was graduating, or something was happening. You can show some interest there by asking how they got on. How was it? How was the flight? And just something about it. And again, if they had a memorable experience, that could be your lesson. That could be then you talking about that experience and then helping them out to explain it better. Final one for this slide is personal questions and knowing the limit. Really important to bear in mind, because we're dealing with people from all over the world, and what for you might be completely normal and everyday, for somebody else might be a little bit too personal. So I think I always try to take my lead from the students themselves, and ask sort of general questions. And if they sort of give me quite vague answers, I know that that's not something to pursue. Let's try to find a different topic. Olga, do you have anything that you'd like to add there?
Actually, here we have two comments. One comment from Ivan Clark, and he writes that very often he makes his own notes. Do you do the same, Tracy?
Actually, yes, and I'm going to be getting to that a little bit later in my part of the presentation. So looking at feedback and correction. So hopefully I'll be able to answer that question a little bit later. And if not, feel free to ask more specifically as well.
Okay, and another question from Elise Green. She actually want to ask you how to know learners better, how to know about their interests.
I think it's just being really open, and I think, Olga, and then you can tell me what you think, but I think that starting off with, this goes back to topics. So I think that sometimes we often have topics like family or festivals, but that might not actually be of interest to the learner. So I think just by asking them, sometimes I say, what have you been up to today? What have you done so far today? And they might tell me that they went to their regular karate class. There you go. That's a topic then. Wow, you do karate. How long have you been doing it for? I wanted to try it myself. I think just a way to get to know them better is really just by being open to what they have to say, rather than coming from a point of view of, I have something planned and this is what we're going to do. Sort of be flexible. What would you say, Olga? What do you do there in your experience?
Actually, I agree about all these things. And very often, if I don't know this specific student, I, of course, ask him or her before our first class why they want to take classes with me, what their interests and goals in Russian language. And it's also very essential, actually, for our topics and discussions, because if they're interested, for instance, some of my students in economics, I would never, ever discuss with them some culture or literature, That's why, it's just about right questions, I think,
Absolutely. And sometimes it happens, I find anyway, Olga, that with the first in the first lesson, I'm kind of feeling my way, trying to get on that, try to figure out what topic is really going to, light this person's face up and really going to get them going. And it can be a bit like that, and that's absolutely fine. But it is, as you said, Olga, it's a good idea to ask them beforehand what their aim is, because as you mentioned, if they want to improve their business language, then yeah, maybe you don't want to start with family. That doesn't mean you can never do it, but maybe just to have a guide to get you started. That's a good idea. All right, well, I'll move on to the next slide. I have another 2 points here. So choosing a topic, what we were just discussing. There's just a few questions for you guys, for us as the teachers, to bear in mind here. So does it encourage dialogue? Is it relevant, appropriate, and interesting to the learner? And can we recycle language and grammar structures? Now, what I mean by those is, does it encourage dialogue? Remember, we want to focus on conversation, dialogue. So it's give and take with you and the learner. Although you want them speaking most of the time, you don't want them to miss out on hearing the language that you have. Remember, they're going to pick things up from you too. So you want to have that dialogue. And I find sometimes with lists of questions, which I've used in the past, lists of questions getting more and more difficult, I find it can become very one way, with me asking the student a question and then them giving the answer. And then we move on to the next question. And the next question might be completely unrelated. So it's not really allowing for a lot of good dialogue. So it's one thing to think about. In terms of relevancy and it being appropriate and interesting, I'm sure a lot of people who are participating right now have a wide range of learners. So you might have children and adults, and what works for one obviously is not going to work for another. An adult who wants to improve their business English, for example, may not appreciate me doing the colors with them. So you really need to think about what materials am I going to use for this particular person. And appropriate, that's just thinking again about the cultural background or just the background as you may have perceived from listening to them. Should I mention this, or maybe we should talk about something else? So even though you have that store of materials, just really dip in and out and think about your learner and if they will appreciate what you've got for them. The third point is important for people who are using it as well, as part of, so that your conversation lesson is part of, is 20 minutes or half an hour, part of a full lesson with reading and listening, for example. Think about, is the topic that we're going to discuss now going to allow us to reuse maybe that grammar structure that we just did, or that great language, that vocabulary that we just looked at? So for example, just to give an example from English, if you have done the third conditional with them, maybe your topic is regret, because that naturally allows them to say things like, oh, I wish I hadn't, which is the language you've just studied, but it gives them, and it provides a space for them to use it if they want to use it. Remember though, it is dialogue. So this isn't a practice session. This isn't looking at structured questions that they then have to manipulate into the language you want them to use, but the topic might just naturally allow them to use it. Okay, so next one is tools and materials. I would say don't overdo it. A lot of the time it's really just myself and the student speaking. Sometimes obviously for conversation classes, you might have given them something in advance, a video to watch or an article to read, and that's perfect too. But I don't think that we need to overload them with too many things and, flipping between tabs and that. And actually, one of the reasons why is you don't really know what capabilities as regards IT the student is going to have. Maybe their internet speed isn't great and they're using their mobile phone. So if you have a lesson where you're going to be, screen sharing and typing notes and things, it might not, the student might get a bit frustrated with that. So at least make sure they know in advance that that's what you are going to do, and ask them if that's a possibility. But otherwise, I think you don't really need too many materials. But if you are using materials, try to personalize them. So this just goes back to what I was saying previously about the topic. Think about whether your student is going to be interested in all of the points on a PDF that you've created in the past and which worked really well. Have a look at it before the lesson and just maybe pick and choose, okay, exercise 1, we don't need to do that. We'll do the second one, so that the student knows that you've thought about their lesson and they'll trust you more then, and they'll want to come back to you too. If you are using materials that you've specifically made for a student and they worked really well and you want to use them with a new student, just remove any names that you might have put on them, okay? I think it's often better to just not have names on it than, present the student with a different name. Be prepared, teacher, of course, but the learner as well. So if you have shared with them an article that they thought that you thought that they would read, and maybe they'd prepare the language and then you would discuss as your conversation topic, make sure at the beginning that they have actually read it. Because what might happen here is, with everybody being so busy and so many things to do, they may not have read it or looked at it, and you don't want to waste your precious conversation time going through that article, making sure they understand it, teaching them vocabulary. If they are happy to do that, then great. Then you let them know, okay, then conversation will be 30 minutes. We'll do this reading first. Alternatively, if they've only got 30 minutes, leave it till the next lesson, move on to your plan B topic, I would say. And then finally, use technology when it adds value. So technology, just for the sake of using it, can sometimes hamper the lesson. In my experience, it just really seems that what students want is to speak. A lot of students, and I'm sure people participating now have had this experience too, that their learner doesn't get an opportunity to go to classes because they're too busy, and they just really want to speak to somebody who speaks that language really well, you, in other words. So they might not really be too fussed about all this, technology that they might be using, apps, etc. They just really want to talk. Again, it depends. Everybody is different, but that has just been my experience. And Olga, I'm not sure whether you've had a different experience there, or you can tell us a little bit about anything that I've mentioned here.
Actually, yeah, I think it's great. And we have some comments about these things as well. Mm-hmm. For instance, how do you deal with beginners? Or generally, do you practice conversations with beginners?
I think that now this is my personal experience, and then Olga, you please then tell us what it is you think. But beginners, that can be quite difficult, and I think conversation, especially over, through Skype or whatever medium you're using. I think that with beginners, a chunk of conversation can be very, very difficult, very frustrating and draining for both teacher and student. So with beginners, there's still an option for conversation, but instead of 20 minutes or an hour, I would make it 5 or 10 minutes. So if I had an absolute beginner, I would definitely prepare a lesson. So perhaps maybe a vocabulary lesson. Maybe it's a reading text. I pull out the vocabulary from there. Maybe point out a couple of easy grammar structures. Give them some free, some controlled practice, some free practice with that, and then a little bit of conversation. Because I've experienced with beginners where there's just you can't get into too much conversation. Olga, how do you see it?
Very often with beginners, it could be very challenging for me as a teacher. And actually, usually I simplify some questions or some topics, but it's possible. But again, it depends. If your learners or students want to do this, it's fine. But some really want to use very long and difficult structures for their level. That's why, here we have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think the problem that might come from that then is that the student is so overwhelmed. Imagine they've booked 30 minutes of conversation with you and they feel up to it, but then when you get into the conversation, you realize and they realize that they cannot express what they want to, and that leaves them feeling frustrated. And then maybe at the end of the lesson they feel, wow, I'm not going to do that again because it was embarrassing and frustrating. So definitely allow them the opportunity to do it, but be prepared to support them and say, wow, that was great. I'm going to show you a few things now, and then have more of a prepared lesson. I think
sure, absolutely. It's about support. And also we have one more question about actually how to continue conversation. For instance, if you ask one question and then you have a very short answer, how do you continue this conversation? What do you do in such a situation?
That's a good question. Should I try and answer that, Olga, or did you want to give some input there?
Yeah, you can. Probably I can add something.
Okay, so I would say in that case, when you've asked a question, think about what kind of question you're asking. Is it a yes/no question? Is that the answer you're getting? If so, then maybe you need to think about restructuring the questions rather than saying "Do you like?" You can say "Tell me about a time when you." So that kind of those kind of questions leave it more open for them. If they're giving you just yes/no answers and very short, maybe they don't want to talk about that topic. But if you feel they do, you could just expand on it. It really depends on what the question was, but who was with you that day? What did you do afterwards? Would you do it again? So you can ask follow-up questions, I think, on many different topics.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I personally very often use this technique about storytelling, and even some very simple question for me could be a very short story. For instance, one of my students, he wanted to buy some football things for his sport trainings, and then I asked him many questions about his hobby, about football, about different players, his favorite one, etc., etc. And it was like a real conversation, very simple. He's a beginner, and very interesting for him actually, because it's about what he likes.
And that is key. I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I think sometimes teachers generally like talking, and obviously people like to talk about what they're interested in, but really it's what the student's interested in, isn't it? So football wouldn't be my thing, but if a student wanted to talk about that, then I definitely would, because that's what's going to get them talking. And you've just shown, Olga, that you can always make follow-up questions from a topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And here one more question. If you're ready for this, if for instance your student talks too much, like 90% of the class, and you can't give them or him or her some.
Well, I'm going to jump in and answer straight away, because I think one thing to bear in mind is we're talking about best practices in conversation. So they can't talk too much, I would say personally. If you, though, have agreed with them that you're going to do a structured lesson where you're going to be looking at the 4 skills and conversation is going to be a part of that, then I try to bring them back. So a student might have booked a lesson with me that's a grammar lesson with some conversation. So if they just start to go off, I'll just listen to them, and then at a point where they take a breath or pause, I'll say, all right, let's get back to what we were doing, and remind them why they wanted that. But it could just be that, as I mentioned before, they haven't had an opportunity to speak at all during that week. And if it's not a problem for them to speak, and if you're able to hear a lot of, to give them a lot of feedback on it, then I don't see it as a bad thing, especially if it's a conversation lesson, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree here. And plus, it's about our personality as well. Because some people, even in their native language, they speak just a lot. That's why, you can't change them. Probably it's just what they want to do,
And I always think it's much better that the student is talking 90% of the time and not the teacher, because that would be a problem.
Yes.
So teacher talk.
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree, absolutely. Yeah.
I'll skip on then to the last 2 points that I have, Olga, if you think it's a good time, or are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So this goes back to a question that we had right at the beginning in terms of making notes. So giving feedback. I've been saying that, conversation, you want conversation, you don't want to break the flow and no grammar, and that's what I've been saying. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to be giving them feedback during conversation. I think it can often be very disappointing for students when they talk for an hour and then they haven't received any feedback and they finish the lesson, they think, okay, well, what was wrong with what I said? How can I improve? And I've had students mention to me in the past that they felt disappointed when they don't receive feedback. So definitely to that person who asked the question, yes, I do make notes when I'm talking to them, and I do give corrections. I just really think about what kind of corrections I'm going to give and when I'm going to give them. So if I have offered a conversation lesson for a full hour, then I will probably every 10 or 15 minutes, or as the conversation allows, I'll interrupt them and say, okay, I'm just going to give you a little bit of feedback there. You said this when you should have said this, just to give them some corrections. It's very important, though, not to overload them, because there's really only so much that is helpful in a conversation lesson. So I try to listen out for those mistakes that they're consistently making, to try to help them to stop making that one, or to change it as we proceed. Corrections are great, but I find something that's even more valuable is suggestions. So a learner might be saying, for example, big, it was very big, or good is a typical one in English. It was very good and the food was very good. And I think, okay, good is fine, but perhaps you want to use something like tasty if you're talking about food, or huge if you're talking about a building. So I give them some suggestions, because this, for the learner as well, it's helping them to expand their vocabulary. And I find that when I give suggestions, the next time I speak to them, the student is still making the mistakes they were making the last time, but they are trying to integrate those suggestions. And I think that's really good. And the last one is a kind of feedback. It's nonverbal communication. This applies really to maybe certain languages. I'm not sure. You will need to decide if, or the teacher needs to decide if it's appropriate for the language they're teaching. But nonverbal communication, what I mean here is, in English, I would be, when I'm listening, nodding, making appropriate faces. Maybe I'm surprised, or I think that's funny and I smile. So just giving them that sort of feedback helps them to know that I'm listening to them. So it goes back to understanding your learner and getting them to speak. And also things like, really, wow, okay. So in English, that would be completely natural in a conversation for me to interrupt with those little words. And so I want them to be exposed to what's natural in my language. So that kind of nonverbal communication can be important. And finally, takeaways. So following on from feedback, give them something that after the lesson they feel, wow, I've got this now, and I'm going to use this to study, or not, but they feel that they have something. So as I'm listening to them, I'm typing usually to give them a little grid or something that they can take away and reflect on, or maybe look back at afterwards. I let them know at the beginning of the class that I'm going to be typing, so that they don't think that I'm doing something else while I'm listening to them. If you are giving them a takeaway, make sure that it reflects the lesson. So try not to give maybe grammar that you thought of but isn't really appropriate to what you were doing. So just making sure that it's going to be useful feedback. And I'm just going to skip just to show you an example. This is just a sample of something that I use for one particular student. With another student, I might use a Google Doc so they can look at it in real time. But for this student, for example, he really wants to learn phrasal verbs. But I know that he's not going to be able to learn 5 a week. So we just pick 1 a week, and I pop that down at the bottom in orange. And then at the end, I provide him with this. And it's not going to be full. It's going to have a few things in the boxes. And it's just something small that he can take away with him. And very finally, just before I pass you over to Olga, as we all know, italki also gives us an opportunity to give feedback to the learner. So, and I use this to either motivate the student if they feel like they didn't do a great job speaking. I let them know that you did a great job in using this language from last week, well done, or your strategies from learning are really paying off. Or I might tell them, okay, you were asking me about listening, and I've just remembered you can use this podcast, or this is something you can do. So I use that feedback through italki just to give them some tips that are personal to them rather than generic. So, Olga, is there anything that you wanted to add here?
Actually, about feedbacks, I have a slightly different approach here because usually I don't write some personal things on italki, for instance. I prefer to say this or to write to my student, and some of them they're shy and they don't want to share this information with other people. I even check that some of them, they just, they close their feedbacks for other people on the site. That's why, I think for me, it's just, easier and more comfortable to say them. You were good today at this, and you did this well, probably some mistakes here. I do this usually personally.
So it's really up to everybody as the teacher, and then the individual student.
Absolutely, because it's just our experience, and of course our teacher, they're very experienced, and they have their own experience.
Exactly, and you'll know what's right with a particular student, and whether they want that feedback or not. Yeah, I agree. You've seen that sample. Just before I let you go, actually, 2 do's and a don't. For conversation practice, do be prepared to just throw your materials out the window and go with a different topic. Do settle in and enjoy the conversation, okay? It's an hour of your time, and yes, you're providing a service, but it's also great if you can enjoy what you're doing at the same time. And don't constantly interrupt with corrections. Let them get some good speaking practice out before then you follow up with a little bit of feedback. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Olga now, and I'll be having a look out for your questions, so keep them coming in.
I think for now we don't have more questions. That's why probably I think I can continue with my sorry, this is mine. I could continue with my presentation. And now you see just some main points here. It's about theory, practice, and recommendations. And here you see this very interesting chart. And Edgar Dale, he did this scientific research about what we tend to remember after 2 weeks. And you see that 70% of what we say, actually we remember. That's why our topic about conversation, about generally speaking, it's really very essential for our students and for practicing foreign languages generally. Okay, and now about different students and different kinds of practice. Your student really are a great resource of topics, not you or textbooks. Very, very often in my practice, I myself also take sometimes English or Spanish classes on italki. And teachers, they offer me some really not interesting or even boring topics. And they don't ask me what I really want to discuss. And I think it's just so easy. Ask your students, ask them questions. Are you interested in this? Do you want to discuss that? It's simple and very, very useful for both. And about topics, actually, Tracy also already has mentioned that. And I want just to emphasize that all topics are possible. Only we need the right choice of words and grammatical constructions. And actually, you can simplify some constructions in Russian language. For instance, it's possible. I hope that in many languages as well. And even for students with a little knowledge, for elementary level, it's possible to discuss some kind of difficult topics. And of course, higher level, a more variety of vocabulary and grammar, and faster speaking speed. With my starters, with my beginners, I usually speak very, very slowly. It's very important for them. Now, for instance, I speak, of course, faster, and in my normal conversation, in my normal kind of live conversation, of course, I do this faster. But remember, it's just a student. And of course, different levels, different speaking speed. And here, as well, no lexical grammatical collapse. What actually it means that sometimes you can give them a new topic, a lot of new vocabulary, a lot of new grammar constructions, and your students are really shocked because they can't at once, to handle all this new vocabulary, new grammar, and some really not so common topic for them. That's why be careful here. Tracy, maybe you want to say something, to add something here?
Well, I really just agree with what you've said there. I think that when you've got students one after another, maybe you're switching from a very high level student to then a beginner, and you need to remember that so that you don't begin the lesson at your normal speed and have the student feel, wow, I don't know what's happening. So definitely grade the language. But I would add that sometimes it can be useful for English, for example, for me to expose them to what natural language sounds like little by little, so that they can start to improve their listening. So, but it really depends on where they are.
Yeah. And actually, it's again about personalities. Some of my students, they even ask me, Olga, please speak slower. They ask me about this. And some of them, they prefer, high speed. That's why, again, just ask. No harm if you ask them what do you personally prefer? And that's it, I think. Okay, in this case, I think we can look at the next one. And here again about some tips. Translation. Very often I pretend that I don't understand my students. Only please don't tell them about this, because if every time you help them and translate, they know that next time you will do the same. And our brain is a very, very clever thing, if we can call this a thing. And of course, it's not so useful for your students, all this help. You think that you help them, but actually you don't. And about pronunciation, I speak, especially with my beginners, with very, very clear pronunciation, slow and clear pronunciation. And I think it's really very important because, they could listen to different podcasts in Russian or watch some short videos or movies, etc. And they can, listen to different accents, whatever, but I want to give the proper pronunciation there. What do you think about this, Tracy?
I think I have a slightly different approach there. But again, it's like you said, Olga, it really depends on the level, because this wouldn't apply to an absolute beginner. But if I've got an intermediate student or above, I tend not to give too clear pronunciation. I tend to try to speak as naturally as possible because of connected speech in English. So in English, we tend to push words together.
Yeah.
And I want them to kind of learn that. But again, it depends on the level of the student, and it's conversation. Again, it's what we're talking about. So I don't want them to feel that they're not part of the conversation because they can't understand me.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah. And what else here? Please try to use common grammar and vocabulary. Because sometimes teachers, not again all, sometimes some teachers, they use some very advanced or not so common grammar and vocabulary. And actually in the first turn, you have to give them something useful, what they can use after your class. Not probably immediately, but still they can use this, because some very rare grammar or vocabulary, probably it's useful for reading or listening or writing, but here we're talking about speaking. That's why common grammar and vocabulary. Any comments here, Tracy?
Well, actually, there's a few comments that are coming in, actually. So it's great to see that based on what you've just said there. We've had a couple of questions too. I'm not sure, it might be too broad for this particular one. Karina has asked, what is the structure of a good lesson? Yes, so exactly that one. So I think it might be a bit broad because we're specifically talking about conversation. So as a section of a lesson or as a whole lesson. And I think it's a really, really broad topic because it depends on what kind of lesson type you're teaching. But Olga, what would you say to that question?
Yeah, I think, I agree. We can talk about this pronunciation for a lot of time, but I think that pronunciation is important, especially for beginners. And of course, you need to practice this. And in speaking classes, you also can pay attention on this topic, on this, part of the language. But again, probably you give different lessons like pronunciation classes, conversational classes. That's why it's up to your student to choose the right one, or you can suggest, if you want to, concentrate on this one, probably it's better for you, the pronunciation class. Because again, clear pronunciation, it does not mean that I will train my students in my conversational classes, to pronounce everything correctly. It's not about that, And just about set the right example for them, my kind of example.
Right. And so for you, that pronunciation, that might be part of a conversation class or speaking or but and talking about what is the structure of a good lesson, it really depends on what lesson is being taught. Is it a reading lesson? Is it a listening lesson? Are you combining the skills? So I think that it's difficult to say what a good lesson looks like. You need to know what your aim is. So what do you want the student to be able to do at the end? And then you can, go back from there.
Yes, yeah. Here I absolutely agree with you, because actually first you have to look at the results. Which results do you need? Which results do your student, want to receive at the end of this class? Pronunciation, okay, great, you can do this, but probably it's not about conversational. It's partly, of course, about speaking class, but it just, partly, not the whole class about that.
And there's a really another question there, Olga, that has come in that is really good as well. How do you manage students who are trying to use complicated grammar structures when actually in common language it's not so complicated? It's actually quite easy. That comes up a lot. What would you say to that?
If they can do this properly, I'm fine with that. I mean, you try to give them firstly more common grammar and vocabulary, but if they know more and if they want more and can do this properly, why not? It's not like restrictions. It's just what I suggest and what I do. Of course, if they already know this, why not?
I think that it's great to allow them that opportunity if they know it or if they want to try it. So maybe they're trying it out and they're hoping for your feedback, then let them go for it. But this comes up for me sometimes too. And I find that I say to the student, you can say that, but honestly, people would generally just say this. So the student is trying to make a really complicated sentence, and it's great, and it sounds great, but actually these two words are probably what you'll hear. And I suppose I'm giving them the option if they want to continue to try to use that or use something else. Okay. Then an opposite question, how do you encourage them to use more complicated structures?
I use them myself. And if I do this myself, and they see my example, of course, they usually try to do the same, And again, you have to remember all the time about their level, because if your student, they are just beginners, you can't use very, very high level, complicated grammar and vocabulary things. That's why you see their level, and you need to be adaptive to this. But usually during my class, I use like 3, maximum 5 new grammar, long or difficult or whatever, or advanced constructions. This is maximum for our memory. Yeah.
Yes, definitely by them using it, by you using it, they pick it up. They do that. I find that they tend to copy me sometimes too. And you might want to, if you might want to then at that point as well say, okay, let's just pause the conversation class, and I'm just going to get you to practice this. So then, and that's, you might do a little bit of a practice session with them on that grammar. But yeah, that's a good point. And we did have another question here, and I'm not sure if this is one going back to what I was saying, but it was, can you give examples of open questions? So I suppose when you ask a student a question and they're just saying yes or no, what would some examples be of getting them to speak?
Okay, about this one, for instance, again, you can ask about how I called this question, like, what would you do if something happened, or what would you do if you lived, in 22nd century, or, in the past, some hypothetical questions about imagination, for instance. But again, not all students like such questions. Some students prefer like some concrete questions. For instance, IT programmers, engineers, they prefer like very strict conversations. And with them, usually I discuss what they prefer, what they like. Again, something about programming, something about food as well. What do you cook? How do you cook this? Could you please explain me this recipe? For instance, I'm also probably interested in this, and I am. That's why, again, like you said before, Tracy, it's just about the interest, and you just try to create this again story about I don't know, how to get a new job, story about cooking something, story about traveling, their traveling, for example.
Yeah, stories, definitely. I think as well, provided the question is not the equivalent of do you or have you, or where, if you're asking something like tell me about, or describe an experience. So think about the word you're using to ask the question, or give a question that means that they have to describe it. Like you said, what would you do if X, Y, and Z happened?
Yeah. If, for instance, something happened, or what would you prefer in such, circumstances, something like this. Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have probably more questions, or probably you wanted to add something?
No, nothing to add from me at the moment. If you'd like to carry on.
Okay, let's continue in this case. Okay, and actually how we get, or where we get information. And on this chart, you see that actually, and it's a very interesting one, words is just 7%. That's it. It's a scientifically proven fact, sorry, but it's true. And then you see voice and tone, 38%, and gestures, 55%. That's why gestures, they're very, very important in our conversation as well. And actually, what do your students want besides conversational practice? We are talking here, of course, about grammar, about words, about how to ask them, how to answer, etc. But we as teachers have to understand that we are all human beings, and we want something besides. We always want something besides, even if we don't know about this. And in our classes as well, they need this and they want this support. And they need this, they want to see that you believe in their ability, that they really can do this, they can manage this. Maybe not now, maybe in 2 lessons, in 1 month, but they will be able to do this. And of course, relax and smile. Remember gestures, remember your tone. It's very important. Subconsciously, they read all this information, your students, for sure. And results actually are the real motivation. If they see results, if you help them, and if they see that your lessons they really helpful for them, they continue their practice, they continue their classes with you. Probably some questions, or you want to add something here, Tracy?
Yeah, Olga, we do have a question with regard to motivation. How do we motivate students to learn? And should we be responsible for motivating students to learn a foreign language? What would you say to that?
It's a very controversial question. I have to admit this. And let's put this in this way. Some teachers think that it's not their responsibility. It's kind of students' responsibility. Some teachers think that, yes, they have to help students. I'm from the second group, honestly. I think that we have to help them and give them, not real probably, but some motivation. Of course, it's impossible if your student doesn't want to learn your language or language you teach. But if he or she really wants, I do my best. If I see that my students want to do this, I will create some extra materials for them. I try to find something interesting, something relevant for them. I really support them and they see this. And, again, it's just my personal approach. It doesn't mean that you have to do the same. No, absolutely not. If you think that it's their responsibility, that's fine. And I partly agree with this. Of course, the adults, usually I teach adults. But again, remember, we are all human beings. And sometimes we have some ups and downs, and we need some human support. Let's put it in this way. Yeah. What do you think, Tracy?
Yeah, I agree. I would be with you on that one. And in fact, I think that it really has to be, if not 50-50, at least 60-40. So yes, the motivation is obviously there with the student because they've booked a class with you, right? So they've taken a step, they do want to learn. But there's many reasons why on the day they might appear not to be motivated. It might be due to their fear of speaking, or they're just very shy in general. But I do agree with you, Olga. I think that if you say, right, it's not my responsibility to motivate you, I think that you will probably not see that student again. Because they, as I said, the motivation is initially there and you just want to nudge them, so maybe reinforcing things, and as you said, giving them a little bit of extra as well. We have another good question here as well, Olga. What do you do when you feel there is no connection between you and the student? I find it difficult to focus myself if I have a student that never smiles.
Okay, about this one, about smiles. Here, firstly, you have to understand that we are all from different cultures. In my culture, I'm from Russia, unexpectedly, right? It's not so common to smile. And actually, if you smile all the time, it's kind of you're a bit, silly person, That's why it's not so common when Russians smile, all the time. We don't do this, honestly. But it doesn't mean that we are very sad people or, we don't want to communicate with you. Firstly, secondly, again, remember, we all have kind of bad and good days, We are not like robots. We are real people. And about connection, yes, I also had something like this in my experience. And what I usually did and do, I try to find something interesting for this specific person. Or probably we could discard this problem. But again, be careful here. Or probably we could discuss something what he or she wants. And again, as Tracy mentioned, it's not about your plan. It's about your student. And sometimes I had some very unexpected topics. And honestly, I wasn't ready for 100% for them. But, it just happened. You can't say, okay, guys, I don't want to talk about this. If your students are here, if they want to talk about this, just let them do this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Let them go with things. Let them talk about it. And I think you hit on something there as well. A question came in related to what you were mentioning there. Should you be honest and tell them that there's no connection here? I really don't know what to say to that, because I probably wouldn't. I know what everybody means. There isn't a connection sometimes. It's just the way life is. But if someone has booked it, but you don't know that the student perceives that. And I've had an experience where, with the first couple of lessons with a student, I felt, wow, it's just not really working out here. I don't think I'm giving the student what they want. But the student was making regular bookings with me, so that was just my perception, in fact. And obviously the way I managed then that lesson was something that the student liked. So I mean, I would probably cautiously say no, don't tell them. But it's up to each individual.
Yes. Again, if you really feel uncomfortable, I mean, you as a teacher, if you want to do this, because probably he or she will find someone else. I mean, another teacher, and you as well. You will find another student, and you are both would be happy. Why not? But I personally agree. Probably, I wouldn't do this. I also had some experience, and again, it's about perception. As Trace mentioned, because I remember once the student, he was from Japan, I think, and I also was thinking like, oh my God, he didn't like my lessons, but he booked and booked and booked, and then at the end, he said something, oh, Olga, you're a great teacher. I'm so happy that you were with me, and I passed my exam. And I was like really, really, really surprised, but
Yeah, you just don't know what other people are thinking and what's going on for them. So I'm not sure. I probably personally wouldn't tell them and just let things, fizzle out naturally, if that's what's going to happen, or find out if actually, the student is happy with you.
Yeah, again, you don't have to say this directly. Probably you could say that you don't have enough time now, for more students, something like this.
Yeah.
Because again, it could be harmful. That's why in such situations, I think it's better to be gentle, honestly.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll let you carry on then, Olga.
Okay, great. Okay, and now about teaching, professional and community. Here, I think now all teachers, professional and community, but the main thing here, we all teachers. And Tracy already mentioned that that sometimes teachers talk too much. We call this one like 4T, like teachers talk too much. In my experience, I also met, and unfortunately, very often teachers who wants to share with me their personal interest, their life, etc., etc. And I'm okay with this, but if it's my class, I want to talk more, honestly. I can ask some questions about myself. I can give them some suggestions, etc. But if it's my class, I honestly prefer me speaking, not them speaking. And next one about answers and questions. Very often teachers try to help their students and they just answer themselves. Don't do this. Really give your students a chance to answer, because sometimes they need extra time. They need to find the right word, the right construction, the right tense, or whatever case. In Russian, we have many cases. Just give them time, really. And some of my students as well, they very often tell me, Olga, please don't tell me. I want to do this myself. Okay, I'm waiting. And here, again, I want to emphasize this and underline this. You have to be interested and show it. No boring faces or interruptions. Sometimes you see that your teacher is so kind of, oh my God, I want, to go outside. I want to relax. I want to do something else, but not this class for sure. Don't do this. If you don't want this student, if you don't want to teach, probably, it's not the good way to show this. Because it's about conversation, it's about sharing interests, it's about positive support, again, and about emotions, and again, positive emotions, not negative emotions. Again, subconsciously, your students will understand that you are not interested, even if you kind of say them. Remember, only 7% what you say is relevant, but the rest is subconsciously, and still they can read this on their face and gestures as well. Do you have probably some comments here, Tracy?
Just to say that I completely agree with everything that you just said.
Okay, maybe we have some questions or comments.
There are definitely comments coming in. One thing I'd just like to point out is some people posting some really good tips for materials and lesson ideas. So everybody should definitely check out what's being said there. One question is, how do you push students to the next level? So if you've got, say, an intermediate learner and you want to get them to an advanced level or start moving to upper intermediate at least, how do you do that?
Okay, it depends. I have different students. Some students, they're very encouraged if you say them, you need this and this and this, and you will approach like the next level, and it's enough for their motivation. Other students, they really don't need all this, like you have to do this, you have to do that. For them, I am kind of a bit cheating, honestly. I give them more difficult materials, like articles for reading and then for discussions, or listening, again, some podcasts, and then for discussions. And it's just a bit harder for them, honest, just a bit, not too much, because too much, it's complicated. It's complicated for them, could be discouraging, and they can, be kind of, oh no, it's too difficult for me, I don't want to do that. Just a bit. And again, of course, you have to know the student very well, his or her personality, what the best approach, here works. What do you think, Tracy?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and just bear in mind that it's a gradual process. So they're not going to go from one month to the next.
Yeah.
They're not going to skip a level.
Sure, it's just a process, yeah.
And we have another question as well. I have a student who can listen and understand individual words very well, but isn't able to connect the words and make sense of the sentence. So how can I help him?
Okay, here I think it's not about, honestly, it's not about communication, or it's not about speaking. I think it's about grammar. Honestly, I don't know language, in which language all this, happens. But for instance, in Russian, it's usually a lack of grammar.
Okay.
If my student, sometimes my new student, they do the same. They just put together all words, just in a row. And it's very difficult to understand what they really want to say. And in this case, I just practicing more grammar. Probably in this situation, you also need kind of more grammar. But again, it's about another class. It's not about speaking, see?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. I think in that case, it's not actually a conversation class then. I think then you need to really design more of a structured lesson. In English, the problem tends to be connected speech. So it's a listening issue that they can understand the words when I speak like this, but when I speak at a natural speed, they can't quite grasp it. So in that case, what I do tend to do sometimes is have the same question structure and change 1 or 2 words each time and repeat those over and over again so they can get used to how it sounds. But as you said, Olga, I think it's a different kind of lesson then that needs to be incorporated. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe more questions?
We'll let you continue there, Olga.
Okay, thanks. Okay, next one. Actually, your students have the right to make mistakes. And this is very important thing that we have to, not have to, but it's better if we correct them. Because here, the main difference between us, I mean teachers, professional or community, doesn't matter in these classes, and language partners. Because what for do they need us if we just listen to them and that's it? Many of my students complain that their teachers, previous teachers, they didn't make any suggestions, they didn't correct them, they didn't tell them how they could improve their speaking, But again, please do this in a positive way, and I call this not I honestly, it's kind of a scientific thing, and it's called like sugar, salt, sugar. Taste some first it tell them something positive like sugar, then some negative things like probably it's better to do in this way, probably you have to practice this and that, and then again sugar, again something positive. Because here you see that our cognitive ability, they're very low if we are in stress situation. And of course, learning a foreign language, it's really a huge stress, believe me. And for our brain, it's kind of, stress and plus new language and plus memorizing, etc., etc. That's why if you criticize them, plus to all these things, it's just too much. That's why, again, sugar, salt, sugar. And corrections essential at what I personally usually do. I asking, as Tracy, she does the same. She has already mentioned that. I asking them again the same question. Usually my regular students know that if I do this, it means that they have made some mistake. They try to understand which one and correct themselves. Okay? And then I ask questions. If they say something, I ask questions with the right form. And they hear, of course, this question, and they understand that, again, they've made a mistake, and they, again, correct themselves. And I always write the correct forms. I do this on chat, Skype, Hangouts, or Zoom, and only the correct forms. Because, again, our visual memory will memorize the wrong one. That's why I don't write never, ever the wrong one. I could say that's, sorry, but it's not how we need to say this. And then I write the correct form. Of course, I say this, and then I write this down for them. Maybe you have some suggestions, Tracy, here?
Yeah, I think that is a good point, avoiding writing the incorrect version of something. So that's definitely one to bear in mind. And you don't know if they're going to make a mistake later and then transcribe that and use the incorrect one. But we do have a question that's come in, quite an interesting one as well. And it relates to differentiating between tutors and teachers. So maybe let me see if I can find it here. Do you make a difference between tutors and professional teachers? Some students expect a lot from lessons while not choosing the right price and teacher. Do you have different approaches? I'd just like to comment on that and say that I think that is actually maybe something that the student needs to, it's an issue that the student needs to sort of deal with, because if you are a teacher or a tutor and you're offering your prices, they know you have a video where they can see what is on offer for them, and then they need to make the right choice, and then maybe they do a trial with you and see if it works or not works. But if you are a tutor and you just want to be giving them conversation practice and they're expecting more from you, then I think it's fine to say to them, this is what I'm offering. And, if you're happy with it, let's continue, and then leave it up to them to decide. But I don't think it's something that the teacher or tutor needs to deal with. I'm not sure. Olga, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I agree. We don't have to hide, our prices or lessons, or, we are teachers. And I think it's about clarifying your description, for your lessons. Because sometimes, honestly, when I read some descriptions, it's not so clear for me what will be in this class with this specific teacher, If you have a very clear description of your classes, I think it's fine. If your students, for instance, if your student, if he or she has booked a class and you think this is the wrong one, you could say, sorry, if you want this, it's better to book this one. Or, in this class, I offer usually this service,
Mm.
And I personally always ask this question before my first class. And I ask what for, what do you want to practice, etc., etc. And then if they ask me, I write them, I think this one, the best one in your situation. If they book some specific class, I always also write and clarify that, this class for this purpose, or in this class, we will be doing this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'd imagine for most people it's the same, that the price of your lesson is reflecting the work that you're doing for that lesson. So
Yeah.
the lesson, most of the time, if it's conversation, then I won't need much preparation. But if somebody has chosen a different skills class or a grammar class, then I'll prepare that in advance. So it's not just the face-to-face time that they're getting; it's also the preparation beforehand. But it's definitely, I think, something for the individual student as a consumer, if you like, to decide. And maybe a discussion to have with them if you feel it's a problem.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Again, it's just about your comfort. If you want to discuss this before, do this before. If you want to discuss this in the class, just give them this opportunity. Tell them, it's better to book another one. Yeah. I think we can continue, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, and about conversation. Actually, in my experience, it could be a part of the class, like for instance, 40 or 30 minutes. And another part is just some grammar and vocabulary. I know that Tracy usually, she gives like 30 or 1 hour class, purely conversation, right, Tracy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, it could be different. It could be 1 hour, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or partly conversation and grammar vocabulary class. That's why if it's some integrating class, in this case, I just try to use the same vocabulary, the same grammar in my second part, in my conversation part. And again, for one class, we have one topic. Remember, again, we are not language partners. It's why be ready to correct them, but please don't overcorrect. Again, we need some gold middle to find this thing. And one class, one topic, because sometimes it could be, many topics, and just 3 sentences here, 5 sentences here, that's it. You haven't discussed this properly. You haven't given them enough vocabulary or constructions, for this specific topic. That's why I think better just to concentrate on one topic for one class. But prepare a few topics just in case, because again, probably this specific topic or this view is not so relevant for this student. They want to discuss another point of view for the same topic, same. And again, Tracy mentioned that real conversation. And I always do these questions for both sides. What actually I mean here, I ask my questions, also ask me questions. And in my experience, very often, students, they are kind of, they are kind of stuck, firstly, because they don't get used to this. Usually teachers ask them questions and that's it. But in the real conversation, Of course, you don't just expect that other people will ask you questions. You expect that you also will ask them questions, right? It's a real conversation, and we try to pretend more or less in our class that it's a real one. Of course, it's a class. That's why you correct. That's why you suggest. That's why you write down some options, etc., and give them feedbacks. But again, it's a conversation class. That's why questions, of course, they're necessary for them. Because very often when I ask my students to do this, they don't know how to actually to make a proper question, how to do this in a right way. See what I mean? And of course, it's a really helpful and valuable skill for them. And here just some examples for very interesting, I think, topics on this site. You can check this, and maybe it also could be useful for you. Maybe, Tracy, you have some comments here?
Just on that last point you made, I think that's really important. I had an experience once as a student while learning a language that I was being asked questions by the teacher. And when I asked back, what about you? And do you, asking those same students, I felt the teacher gave very vague answers and didn't want to respond to them. So I took away from that lesson, don't ask any questions that you are not prepared to answer yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe one piece of advice I'd give there. So
yeah, absolutely. If you don't want to talk about some private stuff, and you ask your students about this, of course, they also could ask you such questions because they see that you kind of can do this. That's why they can't.
We've had a couple of questions, Olga. I don't know if I can interrupt you there to ask them. So we've talked about a student maybe feeling frustrated by a lesson, and question has come in: can a teacher be frustrated if she or he doesn't see any results from the student, if they don't see progress? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, I want to emphasize here, we are all human beings. Of course, we all have feelings. It's absolutely normal. It's not like, okay, one class plus another one. Okay, I'm done here. That's it. I don't care about this. Yeah, of course. And it happens with me as well from time to time. I kind of, sometimes expect, probably I expect too much from some students or from some classes. But again, here in such situations, I try to find what I probably did wrong. Maybe I gave too much information, too much grammar in this conversational class, or topic wasn't really so interesting, or probably I had to, communicate in some another way. I just try to use this for my kind of next class, for my next students, and with this student as well, of course. I just try to improve my, tools.
Absolutely. I think you really hit the nail on the head there, and I would completely agree with that. And I think it is something that's very important for teachers, isn't it? That sort of reflection afterwards.
Yeah.
And I understand that person's question, because there are times when I feel frustrated, and after the lesson, then when I'm out walking or doing something else, I think, what's happening there? And it's usually because of my expectations on that student, and I'm forgetting that after the lesson with me, they're not going to a library to study for 7 days solid before they see me again. They're going back to their families and to their work, and they're very busy. And so I just, give them the space to develop their language naturally, while giving them a little bit of a nudge if I can. But yeah, it usually comes down to, because I've, as you've said, Olga, expected too much from them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree here, 100%, because my experience, because I was very kind of a very strict teacher, like you have to do this, for improving your skills, etc. But then, I realized that it's just life, and this is a part of the life, and probably this is just a hobby for them. It doesn't mean that you don't have to be prepared, but it doesn't mean that you have to put them too much. Again, remember, some students, they're very shy, and they don't want to be pushed as well. They just want to relax. They just want some new skills, just some of my students, they many times they tell me we just want, to do some brain exercises, and I'm okay about this. Again, it depends. If you feel this, it's kind of not what you expect, probably you can write in your CV that you kind of expect a very serious approach, etc., etc. Because probably your students just in another place. I mean, it's not like conversational classes. It's probably grammar classes. I mean this, and that's it.
And I think you have to take the good with the bad. You'll always get, well, good and bad are not really good words to use in this instance, but you need to take the motivated students with the not so motivated students, because you'll get a variety of each. And I think, and there's probably more questions coming in, but we're probably going to have to end it there. And but I would definitely encourage everybody to. Some people online at the moment are answering other questions there and have some really, really good tips. Olga, before we leave everybody, is there anything that you wanted to say?
Yeah. Actually, I have to just some recommendations here. You also mentioned this. Yes, no questions. When like, do you like this? No. Did you do this? Yes. That's it. And again, slang. Here, actually, I'm very strict about this because I don't use slang in my classes because I don't want to be my students, to find themselves in some unpleasant situations because of this. And again, it just what italki recommends, not talking about these topics like marital status, politics, and religion. I personally also, especially with my new students, prefer not to touch on such topics. What's your approach, Tracy, here?
Yeah, I think it really does depend on the student. I mean, definitely, as you said, the very first lesson is probably not going to be one of those questions. And I just go with what the student offers. So in future lessons, if they begin to incorporate their family or talk about the news, then I'll maybe dip into it. But I think, as you've already said this, it's not a speaking partner. They're a student. And so you do need to keep that distance. Yeah,
absolutely. I absolutely agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Oh, yeah. Sorry. We'll have to finish this with this. I think, Olga.
Yes, we have to finish, and I just want to say that you reveal your culture and language for your students. That's why just be friendly, be open and positive, and remember, we're all students and teachers at the same moment, and that's it.
It's a good thing to bear in mind, I think. I hope everybody has enjoyed being with us today. And yes, have a good day, evening, afternoon, depending on where you are.
Thank you all of you. And also you can write us on italki if you want, or you can email us, me or Tracy. I think Tracy is agree here, right?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
It was great to see you guys, and good luck in your job here.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.